Welcome to Life Stories, where we bring you heartfelt tales of love, redemption, and the triumph of the human spirit. Today's story takes you on an emotional journey of betrayal, resilience, and second chances. Follow Emily, a single mother with a hidden past, as she confronts the man who shattered her world. Not for revenge, but for the sake of her children. Can forgiveness and love rise from the ashes of betrayal? Stay tuned to uncover the twists and turns of this inspiring tale. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and start today's story with us. The gleaming skyline of Manhattan stretched before Emily Harrison, now known as Emily Taylor, as if welcoming her back to the city she once called home. The years had transformed New York as much as they had changed her. She stood taller now, her movements deliberate and purposeful, with an air of quiet confidence forged through hardship. At 31, she was no longer the wide-eyed young woman who had believed in promises of forever. The city's steel towers mirrored her resilience, a testament to survival and reinvention. "Mommy, look, that building looks like it touches the clouds." Ethan's excited voice pulled her from her thoughts. She looked down at her son, his bright blue eyes sparkling with wonder as he pointed at the towering structures. The sight sent a pang through her chest. His eyes, so achingly like his father's, reminded her of everything she had worked so hard to overcome. "It does, doesn't it?" Emily smiled, squeezing his small hand. Beside him, his twin sister Lily studied the skyline with an intensity far beyond her years. Her serious expression was a perfect mirror of Emily's own, analytical, thoughtful, and always searching for answers. At 5 years old, the twins were already showing personalities that delighted and frightened Emily in equal measure. They were her world, her greatest joy, and her deepest pain, a living reminder of the love she had lost and the betrayal that had followed. "Do you remember what Mommy told you about today?" Emily knelt to their level, smoothing Ethan's tiny tie and tucking a stray curl behind Lily's ear. She needed them to understand the importance of the day ahead. "We're going to a special daycare while you work at your new job," Lily recited, her tone calm and practical. "And we can't tell anyone our last name." Emily nodded, her throat tightening. "That's right, my smart girl." She had explained it all to them before, the need for secrecy. The new identity. She was no longer Emily Harrison, the naive wife of Daniel Carter. To the rest of the world, starting today, she was Emily Taylor, the brilliant strategist hired to modernize Carter Enterprises. Her children knew her as Mommy, but to everyone else, she was a woman on a mission, a calculated agent of change and quiet chaos. Their destination was only a short walk from Carter Enterprises, an exclusive daycare center nestled between marble-clad office buildings. As Emily helped the twins settle in, she couldn't help but notice the cruel irony. Her children, so much like their father, would spend their days mere blocks from his office, and Daniel Carter remained oblivious to their existence. "I'll be back to pick you up at 5, my loves," Emily whispered, hugging them tightly. Their bubble bath scent calmed her as she felt Ethan's arms cling to her neck a moment longer than usual. "Promise you'll come back," he whispered. Emily's heart cracked, but she forced a reassuring smile. "I will always come back to you," she said, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "Always." 20 minutes later, Emily stood in the marble lobby of Carter Enterprises, her heels clicking against the polished floor. She adjusted her tailored navy suit and brushed her dark hair, now sleekly tied back, to ensure not a strand was out of place. She had prepared for this moment for years, crafting a new identity and gaining experience with competitor firms. Now, she was ready. "Emily Taylor, Human Resources," she said to the security guard, presenting her ID with steady hands. The guard checked her credentials, handed her a visitor's badge, and nodded her through, pinning the badge to her lapel. Emily caught her reflection in the glossy wall. The image staring back bore little resemblance to the woman she had once been. That woman, Emily Harrison, had been trusting and full of dreams. That woman had believed in forever. She had trusted Daniel Carter with her heart and her future. Until that rainy night 6 years ago. The memory hit her with the sharpness of a blade. She had come home early from a business trip, eager to surprise her husband. Instead, she had found Daniel in their bed with Amanda Blake, his chief financial officer. The betrayal had been swift and ruthless. Amanda's triumphant smirk. Daniel's cold dismissal. "You're broken, Emily. You can't give me children. Amanda can. I've already filed for divorce." She had stood frozen in the doorway, too stunned to speak, not yet knowing she was already carrying his children. The elevator dinged, pulling Emily back to the present. She stepped inside and pressed the button for the executive floor. Her new position as Strategic Innovation Director would bring her face to face with Daniel Carter. Every day, she would see the man who had destroyed her life, work alongside him, and watch him try to piece together why she seemed so familiar. He would never suspect that the poised professional before him was the same woman he had discarded. The executive suite buzzed with activity as Emily approached. Her practiced, confident stride masked the storm inside her. She rounded the corner just as a familiar voice reached her ears. "The market projections are concerning, Daniel. We need fresh perspectives." Daniel's deep, commanding voice answered, sending an involuntary shiver down her spine. "That's why we hired the new strategist." The board was impressed with her track record. Emily straightened her shoulders as she entered the room, her gaze falling on him for the first time in 6 years. The sight of him was like a physical blow. Daniel Carter had only grown more handsome with time. His dark hair, now streaked with silver, gave him an air of distinction, and his presence was as commanding as ever. But there was something tired in his blue eyes, something haunted. Amanda stood beside him, her hand possessively on his arm. A diamond ring glittered on her finger, the same ring that had once belonged to Emily. "Ms. Taylor." Daniel greeted her, extending his hand. "Welcome to Carter Enterprises." Emily's smile was smooth, professional. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. I look forward to exceeding expectations." As their hands met, she searched his face for any flicker of recognition. But there was none. To him, she was just another new hire, another cog in the corporate machine. Amanda's handshake was brief and dismissive, her attention already back on Daniel. Emily followed them into the conference room for her first executive meeting. The polished image of a woman with everything under control. But inside, her emotions churned. She thought of Ethan and Lily, their laughter and innocence. She remembered the vows Daniel had once made to her and the life they had dreamed of building together. The time for doubt was long past. She was here now, and her plans were already in motion. One by one, she would dismantle the empire Daniel had built. She would use every skill she had honed, every weakness she had studied, to bring him to his knees. Only when he had lost everything would she reveal who she truly was. But as she sat in the boardroom, listening to Daniel speak with the same commanding confidence that had once captivated her, a small voice whispered in the back of her mind. It sounded so much like Ethan. At what cost? "Mommy." Emily pushed the thought away. Doubt was a luxury she could no longer afford. This was only the beginning. The conference room buzzed with a controlled tension as the meeting progressed. Emily sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, her laptop open to display her meticulous market analysis. The presentation was seamless, every detail, every slide a testament to her precision. But her focus kept straying to Daniel. He sat at the head of the table, his posture commanding, his gaze sharp as he assessed the proposals. This was the man she had loved, the man she had once believed was her future. Yet, watching him now, Emily felt only a cold detachment. He had built this empire by stepping on others, including her, and she intended to bring it all down. "Ms. Taylor," Daniel said, his voice cutting through her thoughts. "Your projections suggest a significant risk to our current strategy. Would you care to elaborate?" Emily straightened, her heart steady. Of course. Mr. Carter. She clicked to the next slide. Her voice firm and confident. Carter Enterprises is lagging behind competitors in digital transformation. Without immediate intervention, market share will erode within 18 months. My proposal outlines steps to modernize operations and mitigate losses. Daniel nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. You've clearly done your homework. The board will want to see these projections in more detail. Of course. Emily replied smoothly, meeting his gaze without flinching. Amanda, seated beside him, let out a small, dismissive laugh. Ambitious. Isn't she? Let's hope those ambitions don't exceed her abilities. Emily turned toward Amanda, her smile unshaken. Ambition is what drives innovation. Mrs. Carter. Without it, companies stagnate. Amanda's lips tightened, but she said nothing more. Daniel's gaze flicked between the two women, a flicker of curiosity crossing his face. Emily returned to her presentation, her heart racing with adrenaline. When the meeting ended, Daniel called her over as the other executives filed out. Ms. Taylor, he began, leaning back in his chair. I'm impressed. Your insights are sharper than I expected for someone new to the company. Emily allowed a small, polite smile. Thank you. I've spent years honing my expertise. Where did you work before this? He asked. His tone casual, but his eyes searching. Morrison Global, she replied smoothly, keeping her voice steady. I worked closely with their strategic team. He nodded. But there was a hint of something in his expression, curiosity. Perhaps even recognition. Emily felt a pang of unease but masked it with professional poise. Keep up the good work, he said finally, dismissing her. As Emily left the room, she felt Amanda's gaze following her, sharp and calculating. Later that evening, Emily sat in her small apartment. The twins curled up beside her on the couch. Ethan was reading a picture book, while Lily meticulously colored in a sketch she had been working on for days. These quiet moments with her children were her sanctuary, a reminder of why she had embarked on this journey. Mommy? Ethan asked, looking up from his book. Did you see Daddy today? Emily's chest tightened. She had known this question would come eventually, but it didn't make it any easier. Not exactly. Sweetheart, she said softly. I work with a lot of people. But he's close by. Lily chimed in, her brown eyes wide with curiosity. Yes, he is. Emily admitted. But remember what I told you. We can't talk about him at work. The twins nodded solemnly, their young faces serious. They didn't fully understand the reasons for the secrecy, but they trusted her completely. That trust was both her strength and her burden. Emily's phone buzzed on the coffee table. She picked it up and saw an email from Daniel. His name stark against the screen. Her heart skipped. But she opened it calmly. Ms. Taylor. Excellent work today. Your analysis is already causing some important conversations among the leadership team. I'd like to schedule a one-on-one meeting to discuss your strategies in greater detail. Let me know your availability. Best. Daniel Carter. Emily stared at the message, a mix of emotions swirling inside her. She had anticipated this, Daniel's interest in her ideas. His desire to learn more about the woman who seemed to understand his company's weaknesses better than he did. But the thought of being alone with him, of having to face him as a colleague while hiding her true identity, sent a ripple of unease through her. Mommy, can we have hot chocolate? Ethan's voice brought her back to the present. Of course. Sweetheart, Emily said, setting her phone down. As she prepared their drinks, she felt the weight of the choices she had made pressing on her. The line between her plan for revenge and the reality of her emotions was growing increasingly blurred. The next morning, Emily arrived at the office early. She wanted time to compose herself before her scheduled meeting with Daniel. As she reviewed her notes, her assistant knocked and entered, a nervous expression on her face. Ms. Taylor. Mrs. Carter is asking to see you in her office. Emily's pulse quickened. but she nodded calmly. Thank you. I'll be there shortly. Amanda's office was spacious, filled with sleek furniture and carefully chosen decor that exuded power and wealth. Amanda sat behind her desk, her smile sharp as Emily entered. Ms. Taylor. Amanda began, gesturing to the chair across from her. Have a seat. Emily complied, her posture straight and professional. I've been reviewing your proposals, Amanda said, her tone casual but laced with condescension. They're bold. But I wonder if you've considered the practical implications of your recommendations. I assure you, Emily replied evenly, my proposals are both bold and practical. Every recommendation is supported by data. Amanda's smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. It's clear you're ambitious, Ms. Taylor. But let me give you some advice. Ambition without alliances can be dangerous in a company like this. Emily met Amanda's gaze steadily. Thank you for your advice, Mrs. Carter. I'll keep it in mind. As she left the office, Emily felt a surge of determination. Amanda's thinly veiled threat only strengthened her resolve. The stakes were higher than ever, and she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Emily walked briskly down the corridor, her heels clicking against the polished floor as she tried to shake off the unease left by her encounter with Amanda. The woman's calculating eyes and thinly veiled hostility had only confirmed what Emily already knew. Amanda was suspicious. But she wasn't the one Emily needed to worry about most. Daniel was beginning to notice her. The email he'd sent lingered in her mind, every word scrutinized. It wasn't just the content but the tone, cordial, almost familiar. She wondered if some part of him had started to sense the truth. That thought unnerved her more than she wanted to admit. Her assistant met her outside Daniel's office, her hands fluttering nervously. He's ready for you, Ms. Taylor, she said softly. Emily nodded and stepped inside, her mask firmly in place. Daniel stood near the window, his back to her, gazing out over the Manhattan skyline. The afternoon sunlight cast a warm glow on his broad shoulders and the streaks of silver in his dark hair. He turned when she entered, his expression professional but tinged with something she couldn't quite place. Ms. Taylor, he greeted her, gesturing to the chair opposite his desk. Thank you for coming. Of course, she replied, taking her seat and crossing her legs. She kept her posture confident, her expression calm. She could do this. Daniel sat down, steepling his fingers as he studied her. I've been reviewing your work closely, and I have to say, your approach is impressive. It's not just the data, it's the way you've connected the dots that others have missed. Emily inclined her head. Thank you, Mr. Carter. I believe in looking beyond the surface. So do I, he said, his gaze steady. Which is why I wanted to have this meeting. I like to understand the people I work with, especially those who make an impact as quickly as you have. Emily suppressed a flicker of discomfort. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Daniel leaned back, a faint smile playing on his lips. Let's start with the basics. Where did you grow up? It was a casual question, but Emily knew better than to take it lightly. The Midwest, she replied, her voice smooth. A small town in Illinois. Interesting, he mused. What brought you to New York? Opportunity, she said simply. It's where the best come to prove themselves. Daniel nodded, but his eyes narrowed slightly, as if trying to piece together a puzzle. Emily could feel the weight of his scrutiny, and it took every ounce of control to remain composed. And what drives you? He asked after a pause. What makes you push as hard as you do? Emily met his gaze, her heartbeat steady. I believe in leaving things better than I found them. Daniel smiled faintly. An admirable philosophy. Their conversation shifted to business. But the intensity of his earlier questions lingered. Emily knew she was playing a dangerous game. Daniel's instincts were sharp, and if he dug too deeply, he might uncover the truth before she was ready. That evening, Emily picked up Ethan and Lily from daycare. Their faces lit up when they saw her, and the tension of the day melted away as they ran to her. She scooped them into her arms, breathing in their familiar scents and feeling their tiny hands clutching at her. "Did you have fun today?" she asked as they made their way home. "We made art project," Ethan announced proudly, holding up a colorful paper collage. Lily, ever the meticulous one, showed her a perfectly folded origami crane. "I'm going to make a whole flock," she declared. Emily smiled, her heart full. These moments with her children were her anchor, the reason she kept going. As they walked, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at the screen and froze. It was a text from Daniel. "Thank you for today. Your perspective has given me a lot to think about. Looking forward to working with you more closely." Emily's pulse quickened. It wasn't the words that unsettled her, it was the way they made her feel. There was no animosity, no condescension, just a genuine appreciation for her work. It was a stark contrast to the man who had coldly dismissed her 6 years ago. The next day, Emily arrived at the office determined to focus on her plan. But as she settled into her desk, she couldn't shake the lingering thoughts of her meeting with Daniel. His demeanor had been unexpected, his interest in her unsettling. She had spent years preparing to confront him, imagining every possible reaction: anger, suspicion, dismissal. But this warmth, this curiosity, was something she hadn't anticipated. Ms. Taylor, her assistant's voice came through the intercom, snapping her out of her thoughts. "Mrs. Carter is asking for you again." Emily sighed but rose to her feet. Amanda's scrutiny was becoming a daily occurrence, and she needed to stay sharp. The battle between them had only just begun, but Emily knew she couldn't afford to lose focus, not now, when the stakes were so high. As she walked toward Amanda's office, she glanced down at her phone and saw another message from Daniel. This time, it was a simple question: "Are you free to meet tomorrow? I'd like to discuss a potential new project." Emily's fingers hovered over the screen, hesitation prickling at the edges of her resolve. She typed out a quick reply, agreeing to the meeting, before slipping the phone back into her pocket. She had come to dismantle his world, not to rediscover the man he once was. But with every interaction, the line between revenge and something more complicated began to blur. Emily tightened her grip on her plan, reminding herself of the pain, the betrayal, and the purpose that had driven her back into Daniel's orbit. She wouldn't let herself forget why she was here. Not yet. The morning sun filtered through Emily's office window as she pored over a stack of financial reports. Her work at Carter Enterprises had already revealed troubling patterns. But now she was piecing together something far more significant: an intricate web of deceit that pointed directly to Amanda. Emily leaned back in her chair, the weight of the discovery settling over her. The numbers didn't lie. Amanda Blake Carter, with her polished smile and icy confidence, had been systematically siphoning money from the company for years. Each transaction, disguised through layers of shell companies, painted a picture of calculated greed. Emily felt a surge of anger, not just for what Amanda had done to the company, but for what she had done to her. Amanda had been the architect of her downfall, orchestrating the betrayal that had shattered her life. And now, Emily had the proof to take her down. Her assistant knocked softly on the door, breaking her train of thought. "Ms. Taylor, Mr. Carter would like to see you in his office." Emily nodded, quickly gathering her notes. "Thank you. I'll be there shortly." As she made her way to Daniel's office, her emotions wavered between determination and unease. Every step she took brought her closer to the confrontation she had been planning for years. But it also brought her closer to Daniel, a man who was becoming harder to see purely as an enemy. Daniel stood by his desk when she entered, a faint smile on his face. "Emily," he greeted her, his tone more personal than it had been just days ago. "Thank you for coming." She returned his smile, carefully maintaining her professional demeanor. "Of course. What can I do for you?" "I wanted to talk to you about Amanda's proposal," he began, gesturing for her to sit. "She's been pushing hard for this new acquisition. But something about it feels Off. Emily's pulse quickened. The proposal involving Chandler Tech? He nodded. Yes. The numbers look solid. But I can't shake the feeling that there's more to it. There was. Emily knew that much already. The Chandler Tech acquisition was a facade. A way for Amanda to funnel money through inflated valuations and into her network of shadow accounts. But revealing that truth now would be premature. Emily needed to ensure that her evidence was airtight before she exposed Amanda's duplicity. I've been reviewing the proposal, she said carefully. There are some elements that deserve closer scrutiny. If you'd like, I can prepare a detailed analysis for the board. Daniel's expression shifted, his curiosity deepening. You always seem to be one step ahead. It's impressive. Thank you, she replied, feeling a twinge of guilt. She had come here to destroy him. But his praise struck a chord she hadn't anticipated. As their conversation continued, Daniel shared more about his concerns for the company. His candor surprised her. He spoke openly about the pressure he felt, the trust he placed in his leadership team, and the challenges of balancing personal and professional obligations. Emily listened carefully, filing away every detail. But as he spoke, she couldn't ignore the moments of vulnerability that broke through his composed exterior. This wasn't the man who had coldly cast her aside. This was someone wrestling with his own demons. Someone who seemed as much a victim of Amanda's manipulation as she had been. That evening, Emily sat in her apartment, reviewing the encrypted files she had been compiling. The evidence against Amanda was damning: falsified valuations, fraudulent contracts, and a trail of transactions that led directly to her personal accounts. It was enough to ruin Amanda's career and potentially land her in prison. "Mommy, look," Ethan called from the living room, holding up a drawing of their family. In it, Emily stood with Ethan and Lily, their faces smiling brightly under a sunny sky. Emily's heart ached at the sight. "That's beautiful. Sweetheart," she said, pulling him close. "Will Daddy be in our family picture someday?" Ethan asked, his voice small but hopeful. Emily's breath caught. She had avoided these questions for so long. But the twins were getting older, and their curiosity was growing stronger. "Maybe," she said softly, "but for now, we're a perfect family just the way we are." Lily, who had been quietly drawing beside her brother, looked up. "I think Daddy would like us. We're pretty great." Emily couldn't help but smile. "You're more than great. You're amazing." As the twins returned to their art, Emily's phone buzzed. It was an email from Amanda. The subject line read, "Meeting request." Emily opened it, her stomach tightening. Amanda wanted to meet in person to discuss the Chandler Tech proposal. It was a bold move, and Emily knew it was a test, a chance for Amanda to probe her loyalty and possibly uncover her intentions. The next day, Emily met Amanda in one of the company's smaller conference rooms. Amanda's demeanor was as polished as ever, but her eyes were sharp with suspicion. "Ms. Taylor," Amanda began, her smile not reaching her eyes, "I've been hearing a lot about you. It seems Daniel has taken quite an interest in your ideas." "I'm flattered by the attention," Emily replied evenly. "I'm here to make a difference." "Indeed," Amanda said, leaning forward slightly. "And yet, I can't help but wonder if your ambitions might be misplaced. Carter Enterprises is a delicate ecosystem. Disruptions can have unintended consequences." Emily met her gaze without flinching. "Change is often uncomfortable, but it's necessary for growth." Amanda's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, and Emily knew she had struck a nerve. The battle lines were drawn, and the stakes were higher than ever. As she left the meeting, Emily felt a surge of determination. She had Amanda's attention now, and she wouldn't rest until she had everything she needed to expose the truth. The storm that had been brewing for weeks finally broke during a late-night meeting. Emily sat across from Daniel in his office, both of them surrounded by stacks of documents. The fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow, but neither of them seemed to notice. "Something doesn't add up," Daniel said, His brow furrowed as he flipped through pages of data Emily had presented. The Chandler Tech deal is a disaster waiting to happen. If Amanda has been pushing this so hard, she must have known the risks. She did. Emily replied, her voice steady but heavy with implication. And it's not just Chandler Tech. There are patterns across multiple acquisitions over the past 5 years. I believe Amanda orchestrated them to divert funds into shell companies. Daniel froze, his eyes locking onto hers. Do you have proof? Emily reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. She slid it across the desk, her fingers trembling slightly. These are the financial reports I've compiled. They show inconsistencies that point directly to her involvement. Daniel opened the folder and scanned the pages, his expression growing darker with each passing moment. The silence in the room felt oppressive as he absorbed the magnitude of what Emily had uncovered. This, he began, his voice tight. This could ruin her. It's the truth, Emily said quietly, and the company deserves to know. Daniel leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. If what you're saying is true, Amanda didn't just betray the company, she betrayed me. The vulnerability in his voice caught Emily off guard. She had expected anger, even denial, but not this raw sense of betrayal. There's more, she said hesitantly, her throat tightening. I've also found evidence that Amanda used her position to manipulate you, and me. His eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Emily hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. 6 years ago, when you ended our marriage, Amanda orchestrated the lies that tore us apart. She falsified medical records to make you believe I couldn't have children. She used that to drive a wedge between us. Daniel's face went pale. That's impossible. I have the proof, Emily said, her voice shaking. She reached for another folder, this one containing documents she had uncovered during her investigation. She handed it to him, her heart pounding as he read through the damning evidence. When he looked up, his expression was a mixture of shock, anger, and something else, regret. You're saying, you were pregnant when I… Yes, Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. And you didn't know because Amanda made sure you wouldn't. She wanted me out of the way. Daniel stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. Ethan and Lily, he said finally, his voice cracking. They're mine. Yes, Emily admitted, tears welling in her eyes. They're yours. The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the desk as if to steady himself. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He asked, his voice a mix of anguish and anger. I tried, Emily said, her own emotions spilling over. But you wouldn't listen. You believed Amanda's lies and shut me out completely. By the time I realized I was pregnant, you had already moved on. Daniel sat back, his hands covering his face. I've spent years wondering what went wrong, he said finally, blaming myself for not seeing the signs, for letting Amanda manipulate me. And all this time, I had children, our children, and didn't even know. They're amazing, Emily said, her voice softening. Smart, kind, and so full of life. They're the best thing that ever happened to me. Daniel looked up, his eyes red. I want to meet them. Emily hesitated. They know about you, she said carefully, but they don't know everything. I've protected them from the worst of it. He nodded, his expression determined. I want to be in their lives. Emily, I know I can't change the past, but I can be there for them now. A part of her wanted to believe him, to let him step into the role he had been denied. But another part of her, the part still scarred by his betrayal, hesitated. This won't be easy, she said. They're just children. And their world is fragile. I understand, Daniel said, his tone resolute. But I'm not walking away from this. From them. Or from you. His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Emily felt her walls begin to crack. But she wasn't ready to let them fall completely. One step at a time, she said, her voice firm but not unkind. Daniel nodded. One step at a time. The next morning, Emily woke to find herself overwhelmed with emotions she hadn't felt in years. The truth was out now, and there was no turning back. As she prepared breakfast for Ethan and Lily, she found herself imagining what it would be like for Daniel to sit at this very table, sharing these quiet moments with them. "Mommy, are we going to the park today?" Ethan asked, his face bright with excitement. "We'll see," Emily replied, brushing his hair affectionately. Her phone buzzed on the counter, and she saw a message from Daniel. "I'd like to meet them soon. When you're ready." Emily stared at the screen, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision ahead. She wanted to protect her children, but she couldn't deny them the chance to know their father. And as much as she hated to admit it, a part of her wanted to see if Daniel could truly be the man he claimed he wanted to be. She took a deep breath and replied, "Let's talk later today." The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Emily felt a glimmer of hope that they could find a way forward together. Emily stood outside the glass-walled conference room, her hands clasped tightly around the portfolio containing the evidence against Amanda. Her heart pounded, but her resolve was unshakable. Today would be the day she exposed Amanda Blake Carter for the fraud she truly was. Inside, the senior board members of Carter Enterprises sat around the table, their expressions a mix of curiosity and tension. Daniel stood at the head of the room, his face calm but his eyes sharp as they followed Emily's entrance. Amanda sat to his right, her polished demeanor intact. Though Emily noticed a faint tightness in her jaw, she knew the walls were closing in. "Thank you all for being here," Daniel began, his voice steady. "As you know, we've convened this emergency meeting to address concerns raised about recent financial discrepancies. Ms. Taylor has conducted a thorough analysis and will present her findings now." Emily stepped forward, her heels clicking against the polished floor. She placed her portfolio on the table and opened it, laying out the documents she had spent months compiling. "Over the past several years," she began, her voice clear and confident, "Carter Enterprises has engaged in multiple acquisitions that, on the surface, appeared beneficial. However, upon closer examination, these deals have revealed significant financial irregularities." She clicked a remote, and the first slide of her presentation appeared on the screen, a detailed breakdown of the Chandler Tech acquisition. This deal, for example, was valued far above its market worth. The overvaluation was not a mistake, it was deliberate. Funds from this acquisition were diverted into shell companies linked to Amanda Blake Carter. The room erupted in murmurs. Amanda's face darkened, but she remained silent. Emily continued, unflinching, "I've traced similar patterns in other acquisitions, all leading back to accounts under Mrs. Carter's control. The evidence is indisputable." Daniel's gaze shifted to Amanda. "Do you have anything to say?" Amanda's composure cracked for the first time. "This is preposterous," she said, her voice sharp. "These accusations are baseless. Clearly, Ms. Taylor has overstepped her bounds in an attempt to undermine me." Emily held up a folder. "These documents include email correspondence, bank statements, and records of transactions. They were obtained legally and verified by a third party." One of the board members, a stern-faced man named Richard, leaned forward. "Mrs. Carter, can you refute this evidence?" Amanda hesitated, her eyes darting to Daniel. "I need time to review these claims," she said, her voice faltering. "This is clearly an orchestrated attack." Daniel's expression remained unreadable, but his voice carried a cold authority. "The board will have all the time it needs to review the evidence. In the meantime, Amanda, you're suspended from your duties as CFO. Effective immediately." Amanda shot out of her chair, her anger breaking through. "You're taking her side. After everything we've built together." "What we built," Daniel said evenly, "was based on trust. You've destroyed that." Amanda's eyes blazed as she grabbed her things. "You'll regret this," she hissed. directing her venom at both Daniel and Emily. "You think you've won. But this isn't over." She stormed out of the room, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. Later that evening, Emily sat in her apartment, trying to unwind. The day had been a whirlwind of emotions. She had achieved what she had set out to do. Amanda was exposed, her influence shattered. But instead of triumph, Emily felt only exhaustion. She thought of Ethan and Lily, who were playing quietly in their room, unaware of the storm their mother had weathered. Her phone buzzed, and she saw a message from Daniel. "Thank you for today. I don't know how I missed it for so long. But you opened my eyes." She stared at the message, her emotions in turmoil. A part of her wanted to respond, to acknowledge the connection they seemed to be rebuilding. But another part of her held back, wary of trusting him again. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. When she opened it, Daniel stood there, his expression a mixture of relief and uncertainty. "Can I come in?" he asked. Emily stepped aside, closing the door behind him. "The twins are in their room," she said softly. "They don't know about today." Daniel nodded, his gaze searching hers. "I wanted to thank you in person. What you did today, it took courage." "I didn't do it for you," Emily said, crossing her arms. "I did it because Amanda needed to be stopped." "And you stopped her," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "But I need you to understand something, Emily. I let Amanda manipulate me for years. But I see everything clearly now. I see you clearly now." Her defenses wavered, but she stood her ground. "What do you want from me, Daniel?" He hesitated, then said, "I want to earn your trust. I want to be the father Ethan and Lily deserve. And I want to fix what I broke between us." Emily looked away, her emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "This isn't something you can fix overnight." "I know," he said, stepping closer. "But I'm willing to take it one day at a time. If you'll let me." She met his gaze, searching for any sign of the man who had betrayed her all those years ago. Instead, she saw someone different, someone humbled by his mistakes, someone determined to make amends. "One day at a time," she said quietly. "That's all I can promise." Daniel nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "That's more than I deserve." As he left, Emily closed the door and leaned against it, her heart heavy but hopeful. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, it felt like it might lead to something worth rebuilding. The following week, the office buzzed with the fallout from Amanda's suspension. News of her misdeeds had spread rapidly, sparking a mix of shock, gossip, and relief among Carter Enterprises employees. Emily, now officially promoted to interim CFO, felt the weight of her new responsibilities pressing down on her shoulders. Sitting in her spacious new office, Emily glanced at the photo of Ethan and Lily she had placed on her desk. It was a reminder of why she had taken this step, why she had endured years of pain and plotting. But now, the world she had carefully constructed was shifting. Her pursuit of revenge had evolved into something far more complex, and she wasn't sure how to navigate it. A soft knock at the door broke her train of thought. "Come in," she called. The door opened, and Daniel stepped inside, his expression warm but cautious. "Got a minute?" "For you. Maybe two," Emily replied with a small smile, gesturing for him to sit. He chuckled as he took a seat across from her desk. "How are you holding up? I know stepping into Amanda's role is no small feat." Emily sighed, leaning back in her chair. "It's a lot. But I'm handling it. I have to." Daniel studied her for a moment before speaking. "I wanted to thank you again. Not just for uncovering the truth about Amanda, but for staying. For giving this company a chance and for giving me a chance to fix things." She hesitated, unsure how to respond. "I didn't do this for you, Daniel. I did it for myself. And for the twins. They deserve a future where we're not tangled in the past. And that's exactly what I want to give them," he said earnestly. "I know I can't erase the mistakes I've made. But I can be better for them. And for you. His sincerity caught her off guard. Over the past few weeks, he had shown a side of himself she hadn't seen in years. He was no longer the cold, ambitious man who had cast her aside, but someone humbled by his mistakes and determined to rebuild. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Mrs. Harper, the twins' daycare teacher. Ethan is feeling a little under the weather. He's resting. But I thought you'd want to know. Emily's expression shifted to concern. And Daniel noticed immediately. What's wrong? Ethan's not feeling well, she said, grabbing her bag. I need to pick him up. I'll come with you, Daniel offered, already rising. Emily hesitated. Are you sure? This might not be the right time for the twins to. They're my children too. Emily, he said firmly. I need to be there for them. No matter what. Something in his tone convinced her. Okay, she said softly. Let's go. The drive to the daycare was quiet, the weight of the moment hanging between them. When they arrived, Emily led the way to the small, brightly colored room where Ethan lay curled up on a beanbag chair, his face pale but his eyes lighting up when he saw her. Mommy, he called weakly, reaching for her. Emily knelt beside him, gathering him into her arms. I'm here. Sweetheart. How are you feeling? Tired. Ethan mumbled, resting his head on her shoulder. Daniel crouched beside them, his expression tender. Hey, buddy, he said gently. I'm your dad. Ethan blinked up at him, his small brow furrowed in confusion. Daddy? Daniel nodded, his voice thick with emotion. That's right. I've wanted to meet you for so long. Emily felt tears prick her eyes as she watched the exchange. Ethan seemed to process the words slowly, then reached out a hand to touch Daniel's face, as if to confirm he was real. Will you come home with us? Ethan asked. Daniel smiled, his eyes glistening. If your mom says it's okay. Emily's throat tightened, but she nodded. Let's take him home. Back at her apartment, Lily greeted them with excitement, though she quickly became concerned for her brother. Ethan. Are you okay? She asked, her small hands fluttering over him as he settled onto the couch. I'm okay, Ethan said, his voice still quiet. Daddy's here. Lily's eyes widened as she looked at Daniel. You're our dad. Daniel knelt to her level, his voice gentle. Yes. Lily. I'm your dad. She studied him for a long moment before throwing her arms around his neck. I knew you'd come. Emily watched the scene unfold, her emotions a whirlwind. The sight of Daniel with their children, his quiet care for Ethan, the way he held Lily so gently stirred something deep inside her. This was the man she had fallen in love with, the father her children deserved. But could she trust him with her heart again? Later, after the twins had fallen asleep, Daniel lingered by the door, reluctant to leave. Thank you for letting me be here today, he said. They needed you. Emily replied. And maybe I did too. His eyes searched hers, a flicker of hope lighting his expression. I meant what I said. Emily. One day at a time. She nodded, her heart still guarded but softening. One day at a time. As he left, Emily sat in the quiet of the apartment, her thoughts racing. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, she felt like they were moving toward something worth fighting for, a chance at healing, at redemption, at being a family again. The following weeks were a delicate dance of rebuilding. Daniel had thrown himself into being present for the twins, earning their trust little by little. He showed up for playdates at the park, helped Lily with her intricate paper crafts, and even attempted to bake cookies with Ethan, though the resulting kitchen chaos was a sight to behold. For Emily, watching Daniel step into his role as a father brought a strange mix of emotions. There was relief in seeing the man she once loved being there for their children, but also a persistent wariness. Trust wasn't something she could give freely anymore, not after all they had endured. One Saturday morning, the four of them strolled through Central Park. the crisp autumn air alive with the sound of rustling leaves. Ethan and Lily ran ahead, laughing as they chased a squirrel that darted between the trees. Emily walked beside Daniel, their strides unintentionally matching. "They're amazing. You know," Daniel said, his voice soft. "So full of life." "That's all you." Emily glanced at him, her guard instinctively rising. "They're a mix of both of us." He smiled. But there was a sadness behind it. "I missed so much. Their first steps. Their first words. It kills me to think I wasn't there." "You weren't there because you chose not to be," Emily said quietly, her words laced with the pain of the past. "You believed Amanda's lies without even giving me a chance." Daniel stopped walking, turning to face her. "You're right. I was blind. Selfish. And so desperate to believe what Amanda was telling me because it gave me an excuse to avoid my own fears. But I'm trying to make it right now. Emily. For you and for them." She looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of insincerity, but all she saw was raw honesty. Still, the wounds ran deep. "It's not that simple, Daniel. Trust takes time." "I know," he said, stepping closer. "But I'm not going anywhere. I'll wait as long as it takes." Their conversation was interrupted by Lily calling out, "Mommy, Daddy, look what I found." She held up a vibrant red leaf, her excitement shining brighter than the sunlight filtering through the trees. Daniel smiled, breaking the tension. "That's beautiful, sweetheart." As the twins ran toward them, their small hands filled with leaves and acorns, Emily felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, the future they were slowly piecing together could work. At Carter Enterprises, the board meeting to finalize Amanda's removal loomed. Emily stood before the gathered executives, her presentation concise and compelling. She detailed the steps required to recover from Amanda's financial schemes, offering a clear path to stability and growth. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Richard Matthews, the board chairman, stood and addressed the group. "Emily Taylor has proven herself to be not only an asset to this company but the driving force behind its recent recovery. I propose we remove the interim from her title and officially name her as our Chief Financial Officer." The motion passed unanimously, and Emily felt a wave of pride and relief wash over her. For years, she had fought to reclaim her life and her place in the world. Now, she stood as a symbol of resilience and determination. Daniel was waiting for her outside the boardroom, his face lighting up when he saw her. "Congratulations, CFO Taylor," he said warmly. "Thank you," she replied, her smile tentative. "I'm proud of you," he added, his voice earnest. "You've built something incredible here." Emily's chest tightened. "I couldn't have done it without the motivation," she said, her tone carrying a hint of irony. Daniel chuckled softly. "Even if that motivation was me being an idiot." "Especially then," she said, a small smile tugging at her lips. That evening, Daniel joined Emily and the twins for dinner at her apartment. The atmosphere was warm, filled with the chatter of the children as they recounted their day. After the meal, Ethan and Lily insisted on showing Daniel the fort they had built in the living room. A masterpiece of blankets, pillows, and imagination. As they played, Emily sat on the couch, watching the scene unfold. Daniel's laughter filled the room, blending seamlessly with the giggles of their children. It was a picture of the life she had once dreamed of, a family whole and happy. When the twins finally fell asleep, Daniel lingered, helping Emily clean up the scattered remnants of the evening. As they worked side by side, the quiet intimacy between them grew. "You've done an amazing job with them," Daniel said, his voice soft. "They're happy because of you." Emily paused, a dish towel in her hand. "They're happy because they're strong. Stronger than I ever gave them credit for." "And you," he said, stepping closer. "You gave them that strength." She looked up at him, her defenses wavering. "Daniel, this doesn't erase the past." "I know," he said, his tone steady. But it's a start. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove to you that I've changed. For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of their shared history hanging between them. Then, slowly, Emily nodded. One day at a time. Daniel smiled, a mixture of relief and hope in his expression. One day at a time. As he left that night, Emily felt the stirrings of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years: possibility. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, she believed it might lead to something worth fighting for. In the quiet of her apartment, with the soft sounds of her children breathing in their sleep, Emily allowed herself to dream of a future where forgiveness could bloom, where love could find its way back from the ashes of betrayal, and where their family could finally be whole. In the quiet of their home, Emily watched as Ethan and Lily played happily in the living room, their laughter filling the space with warmth. Daniel sat beside her, a gentle smile on his face as he handed her a cup of tea. The journey to this moment had been long and fraught with pain, but they had found their way back to one another, one step at a time. Forgiveness had replaced anger, and love had grown from the ashes of betrayal. Their family was whole again, built not on perfection but on resilience, understanding, and hope for the future. Thank you for joining us on this heartfelt journey. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Life Stories for more inspiring tales of love, redemption, and the power of second chances. Don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts below. We'd love to hear from you.